There were people who would say, oh, these scratch card, we all get paid because we keep paying each other and we are playing pays. The way I always think about it is we are a sports team, but every athlete has to be super fit, has to show up for training, has to play like a team, has to go win the matches. I remember when we came to Flipkart, there was a problem which Flipkart was facing at that time in the engineering team, that there was something that if they wanted an equipment, it used to take a little bit longer. And I remember that I had asked the equipment team, I said, no, if an engineer wants something, within 24 hours, please, so figure out how, because it's their productivity which is based. And I'm at work, in the middle of a meeting, she sends me a message saying, don't worry about it, I paid it using Google. That was such a heartwarming thing that a person who at one time didn't have the confidence with the accessibility of the product was able to go and do it. And this story is repeated billions of times around the world, right?
Awesome, Peeyush. Good to see you again. I think.
Yeah, it's great to be here and good to see you.
Yeah, I think you are managing jet lag really well. I think last week we were meeting in Boston, New York, and looks like you are as fresh in India as well. I know you battled Bangalore traffic for last 2 hours, so thanks for braving that and showing up.
Yeah, Bangalore traffic puts it all in perspective. Jet lag is nothing compared to coming from Gopalan Mall to this place.
Fair enough. Yeah. Different type of jet lag.
Yeah.
But last week, there was a pretty interesting, conference. I think both of us, got an opportunity to be there. This longevity conference, and all these folks are talking about all the futuristic stuff that's going to happen. Longevity space, health, digitization of health, artificially growing organs in the lab, and so on. Mm-hmm. What are some of your reflections? You think some of that stuff is going to have some material impact in your life in coming years?
Yeah, I think, as you remember, there were so many things which were amazing. Even if you have from outside been reading about what's happening, seeing it in front was amazing. But I had few very interesting, takeaways for me. One was, I was actually impressed with how far along some of the technologies are. We saw those dialysis machines and all that. And I felt like the technology is so far that it might actually be very useful to a whole lot of people very soon. I always feel like future is already here, unevenly distributed, and that was a clear example that the future is here. The second thing which was very interesting, which they said is take care of your health for next 10 to 15 years. And, there will be a lot more medical science can take care of you. I didn't know that it was actually that close. I actually tell everyone I went and talked to my friends and my spouse, and I was 10 to 15 years, you really be serious about exercise every day, don't drink alcohol, don't smoke, things like that. And after that, it's party time.
Do you want to explain the whole idea of longevity escape velocity that these guys are talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly.
So for our audience,
of course, yes. So the basic idea, based on which this 10 to 15 years they were talking about, was that, as you take care of your health, you live a healthy life longer. And as you live healthy life longer, more technical innovations and more understanding about health, which is a very complex thing, become available to you, which extends your lifespan further. And therefore, eventually you get to a point where the extension it provides is faster than the rate at which you will bring damage to it. And therefore, everything as you're living your life is actually now in escape velocity mode, and accidents are the primary way you will be hurt or
and that concept is incredible, to the extent we are willing to believe. I think some folks have been talking about for last 15, 20 years. I first got introduced to this, with the Ray Kurzweil's, and I think he's at Google now, or was for a while. But his book called Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever. And basic, premise of the book was that advances in biotech, longevity is happening at a fast pace. At some point, for every one more year we live, we'll also be able to extend human lifespan by 1 year, and therefore technically you can live for as long as science can enable. And it's fascinating, and looks like a lot of really credible scientists, engineers, product developers are taking it seriously, and billions of dollars are going into it. What do you think about this whole thing? Almost biology seems like coming out of lab and from the pharma and hospitals to this consumer facing products which can do something in our life. You think, that's an area where we can see a lot of interesting startup products happening over the next 5-10 years?
Yes, I think we definitely can. The third thing, which was my big takeaway there, was the amount of data, the digitization of biology. And then, of course, like if you remember, every other sentence was AI on it. Well, what was AI doing in the room is because the data was so much that to crunch it and understand patterns around it and do simulation, AI was required or machine learning was required. And I think that can definitely be, that'll be probably the first place where you can do to speed up the products which help speed up things, products which help up generate more data. I mean, biological self, I know that you're wearing a watch, which is probably digitizing half the metrics of a watch or a ring and all that. So there is all these spaces. There is, of course, I would not call it a wall, but there is a regulatory body which actually has to approve before it hits the consumer space from therapy perspective. But before that, I think platform layer, there is a lot to be done. Digitization of biology, there's a lot to be done. And there is a lot of startups which can do things. And the fascinating thing which I found, which we have a dog, and the thing was that, it takes a while to prove out hypothesis in these areas. Humans live these days for 80 plus years, and you do an intervention, but it's hard to do the longitudinal study, and the FDA will not approve till, they see the pros and cons. So I think wherever things are blocked by FDA, this would be another place where we will see startups go do things.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating, whole digitization of biology. And given that I think and David Sinclair talks about this whole information theory of aging. There's so much data gets generated in our body, 30 trillion cells, I think 40 trillion cells, 30 trillion microbial cells, and something's happening with all those cells, pretty much, every few milliseconds. If you do the math, it's a staggering amount of data. But all of this, in some ways, some total of that is what running, and what is the pace of that, rate of change of all of those things is probably what translates into diseases and dysfunctions and so on. So there's at some point in the whole platform on which you have API of human bodies on which you can write code.
Yeah, and it's so humbling to see what happens inside one cell, and compared to we think we have all this technology, and only now we are barely starting to understand how the amino chains will fold, the proteins, how they will fold, and we still cannot simulate what happens after that in the cell. So even a simulation of a single cell, science has not been able to crack, even though we are digitizing. So I think there's a lot to be done.
I don't know when they can do it, because I think few years ago when I learned that each cell is approximately 100 trillion atoms. Just, fall off the chair thinking about the staggering complexity. It's a machine which is, nature has built by assembling these 100 trillion cells into all kind of complex, blow up a cell. There is, all kind of energy generation factory going on. There are things which are fighting diseases, there are things taking care of, aging and so on and on. It's just staggering. I think, probably, technology has some ways to go to be able to model all that.
Yeah, I think that's where they are trying to apply AI to really simplify as much as possible, find the salient features which dictate what will happen, and predict to some level of precision that this is what's going on.
Is it possible? Today, if you look at, general big tech, and you are part of, big tech, they play a huge role in our lives, and a lot of things, everything from shopping to financial services to perhaps, I think you can say even logistics, and a lot of infrastructure of the world is driven by the platform systems. In future, we'll see big tech of health as well, potentially, which is once whole human body is digitized and able to modify, manipulate, enhance, maybe one day.
I actually don't know what the term big tech honestly means, okay. So it is hard for me to tell. Sometimes I feel like it really is after the fact, when something has really succeeded, is when you know that it is big tech, because it is a lot of people using that product. If we go by that definition, I think that in the hierarchy of needs, the desire to be healthy and desire to live long, healthy lives is so fundamental that if other desires like ability to communicate and entertain ourselves resulted in people creating products, which a lot of people in the world have, I am confident that there'll be something here. I don't know what shape it will take. It can be a big pharmaceutical company. It can be something else, which is a consumer focused company. But I do feel that the adoption by the masses is only beginning.
Well, I think it's a fascinating area, and I think it's a common area of interest for both of us. So I think we'll keep watching this space, keep experimenting on ourselves, and let's see how it evolves. But let me just go back to kind of your career trajectory, right? You have, I think I'm assuming you started as an engineer at some point, and you have been in the technology field for nearly 3 decades or just, short of that, right? And you've gone through various stages. So I'm guessing, doing engineering work yourself and managing teams, managing team of teams, very large leadership role now. Like last 5-6 years, you've driven, massive initiatives. Just if you just zoom out and look at your journey and evolution as a technologist, like what are the different distinct phases where you acquire different type of a skill set or different way of thinking, which is, enables you to do, I'm guessing right now you probably don't write much code, but you drive very large initiatives. So maybe just give a sense of that trajectory.
Yeah, actually, that's, I can give a sense of the trajectory which is in my mind of how it has worked out. I think that the first seminal thing which happened, which put me on a particular path, was that I was able to study computer science from a place like IIT. I underestimated how it puts me on a train track, which is very different. I loved computers before that. 2 years before that is the first time I had touched a computer. But you know how getting into the right program in a university like that is not something just because you are interested, it happens. And I have a lot of people to thank for, getting me into that. I think that has been one seminal one. It's always easy to look in hindsight and see, oh, you know what, that actually was such a big thing. That gave a lot of people ask me these days saying like, do you really need to study computer science? Because programming is so easy to learn by yourself. And I'm like, yes, absolutely, programming is easy and you can build very amazing things. The one thing which it did is it built the fundamental foundation and the confidence that you can go do things. So based on that confidence, then I was a software engineer in actually the first company where I learned like what it really means to build product for the world was actually in Microsoft. That was my first true consumer product company. And then I realized what all the things you do in the lab and all that is not, it's not the same as what you do when you're building product for the whole world. But very soon, this next seminal thing was realizing that what I wanted to work on was like rapid, fast-moving things. At that time, I thought that it is all about what is the opportunity in front of us. And I'll give you an example. We just had our kid. I didn't have a green card or anything. And I was on paternity leave from Microsoft. And then I suddenly saw this company called phone.com had launched a browser on which, on your cell phone, which we didn't have the phones like today, but the cell phone, and you could browse something and you can pull up like a stock price. And I was like, wow, this is very different. And then I went and actually that's where, if you remember, our mutual friend, Naveen Jain, we had met. So I went and talked to him and he said, oh, I have a company, we're going to go in mobile internet. Why don't you come work for us? So I canceled my green card, everything, and with a little baby in my hand, I was like, my wife was like, are you sure you're doing the right thing? But she was like, okay, and joined a startup, right? But that was the thing. So that is the second seminal thing to me. It was like, if things are appearing that the whole world will change because of this, then shifting to that. I think I have really tried to stick to that. Yeah. As a matter of fact, our longevity conference, right? Many people are surprised that why are you taking a vacation and paying to go attend a conference? And the answer is because like there's something huge happening here. So I think that has continued many times, worked on multiple startups. Then the third thing, since you alluded to as you grow in your career, I realized at one time that how much ever good you are at building a system or writing a code, there's only that much leverage you can have. And if you can lead a number of people towards a common goal, the results can be amazing. So I think that I remember when I told my first manager that I wanted to run the team as opposed to be an engineer. And he asked me the question, why are you excited? Because a lot of people think like being a manager is a good thing. And I told him because it's so much easier to get computers to do what you want compared to getting, humans to do what you want. But if you can solve that, a whole lot can happen. So that was the thing. And I think the next phase really has all been about like, what is the new trend appearing and what role am I playing in it? And the next thing after that was like, okay, you are leading team, but then it is like, the next way of thinking was, what is the first principle ways you're thinking about it and what problem are you solving? We tried to do that when there's a time I led engineering for what is called Google Workspace, the enterprise focused products, or when we were building Moto G, Google Pay was another example. Like, okay, how do we build the business? How do we build the complete offering? It's not about like leading a team so that I can get more done.
So as you, have a lot bigger and bigger charter and you're trying to solve a larger problem, as a technology leader, how much you need to do solutioning, architecture, or understanding key product features, or just managing teams? Like, what are the big components of job as a technology leader trying to make big things happen? And we'll talk about some of them. You've been part of some massive initiatives. We'll come to that. But just I'm trying to see, like, just as a leader, what takes most of your attention?
If the team is working really well, if the team is functioning really well, then hopefully you are not doing a whole lot. I feel like you are always working yourself out of the job. If you have good people running things, then your primary job is to make sure that any problem they are facing and they cannot solve, you're able to solve by them coming to you and you're providing all the help. Otherwise, you are essentially not interfering and you're looking around the corner saying, okay, what is happening on the other side? And then you're building that out. So I think that is the primary thing. And that does require sometimes, I think just managing people is in any large technology company it's not great because, these are smart people. I remember when I was in their shoes, if I had a professional manager who didn't understand what the intricacies were, then there's a limit beyond which I would not really enjoy interacting with them. But at the same time, I would also feel like they're not able to look beyond because they are not looking at the details. So I think it's a very big challenge that how do you get into the details and are able to maintain the context and yet, be able to operate at the level which you want.
And details can get very complicated and quite technologically sophisticated. So do you continuously invest enough time so you can speak the language, understand the concepts, and be able to, when you go down 2-3 years below and actually getting into problem domain, like while managing, thousands of people of team.
Yes.
Like that's a very hard balance too.
Yeah, there's a pattern which I have used in the past, which I can share. They're probably everybody uses different ways. The pattern which I have used is whenever I step into a new thing, I usually take a vacation before that. But that entire vacation, and it's like all the pictures on those vacations look the same, which I'm sitting and reading. Because I'm trying to essentially get caught up as much as possible. Before that, I'm like collecting all my reading material and I'm sitting and reading through all that is going on. Doesn't mean that I know everything, but at least I'm not as clueless and everybody's investing in teaching me every day. But that is the first. The second thing is, of course, identifying the areas where you want to focus and areas where you don't. So generally we pick okay, here are the 3 big problems to solve. If you roll up your hands and you go deeper into it, then you learn a lot more, right? Actually, I'll give you an example. If you remember, when I had joined Flipkart, I actually spent a bunch of time reading, but it kind of told me this is what's going on, but not to the level. But then it became that, hey, we got to launch BBD and we don't have the data center ready. And I remember I was talking to 7 floors of engineers one-on-one about what to do. And it taught me so much about what was happening, right? So you pick problems, you roll up your sleeves and you kind of go deeper into it. So that is the second part. And the third one is like, you have to invest time in staying up, caught up with new things which are happening, because that connects with the last bit, which is like, what about around the corner? Because everybody's very heads down doing what they're doing. So you have to watch that, here is something else is going on.
I think all three very useful tools. I think the first one, this whole taking a break and going through all the reading materials. I think one framework, I use is, if you're interested in any topic, just read 10 books on the topic. And what I realized that most people will never ever read 10 books on the same topic. But what happens when you read 10 books, and 10 is an arbitrary number, it could be 8, 10, 12, whatever, you see a lot of common patterns. Like, what are the things that everyone agrees on? What are things which are, very fringe ideas? What are controversial ideas? Where people are challenging each other and calling them names and so on. Right? And that perspective, reading 10 books is hard, but not that hard. People can get it done 1-2 months.
Yeah.
And that's such a simple way you can be smarter than most people in any room just because you have read this 10 books.
Yeah, I think you are right. I mean, I had not thought about 10 books on the same topic, but you are right that the mental model you build is a lot richer as you are assimilating all of this. Right. And then you can figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And second, I think when you're saying, walking up and down 7 floors of Flipkart, I remember this very old book, Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence. He talks about this management by wandering around. The idea is, those are more in the factory context or retail context, but you just be on the shop floor and talk to a lot of people. And I think that continues to be as relevant as ever. I mean, the best source of truth is people on the ground. And just recently I was going through Elon Musk's book as well. And that's one of the things, he regularly uses, at some point, bypasses all the levels of hierarchy and just starts talking to the, the foreman on the ground, who is drilling bolts on the rocket or whatnot. And that's where you get such a, crystal clear picture.
Yeah. I will tell you, by the way, it is a core tenet of, at least for me and my teams in Google, we have been doing this. We also have a very distributed team. This thing which you said, like, one of the goals which I have is, my feeling is in engineering, the real actual work happens at what we call at a tech lead level. Among 5 engineers, one of them is a relatively leader, popping up as a leader who others listen to, and everybody's writing code. It's not a management job. It's a thought leadership job. But making sure that you are talking to every tech lead and understanding, and there might be like 5-6 layers in the middle, but going to every office, like if we are here in Bangalore, would be like, okay, get people in a room. What's working? What is not working? Talking to each one of them, understanding patterns, and distilling from those patterns and doing few things. One is that also letting people in the middle know that you have identified patterns which are not being addressed. Right? Because everybody's busy, even if they're well-intentioned, they have not caught things. And the second interesting thing was walking around, like just walking to every desk and saying, show us, like, do you have anything cool? Right. And they'll all give you demos, and then you will build even another bigger picture, which is probably not showing up in any of the business reviews, not showing up in any of the newsletters or any updates. And there are people trying things out. So you can now,
this may appear, deceptive is simple, but I think, there's a lot of times people start growing in any corporate hierarchy and have bigger role. You tend to hear from just same 10 people who are your direct report, at best, few more people, and your entire worldview is filtered by, 15-20 people. But it becomes a highly colored worldview based on what people want to share and not share. This ability to just, go to the grassroots levels and have that also one rich source of not only information, but also dialogue and brainstorming and so on.
Yeah.
Probably a very powerful leadership tool.
It's very hard to do because it is time consuming. Right. But the value of that is, one of the hardest things for any leader is to understand what's happening in the organization. Right. It's not that easy. The information will just not flow to you.
Yeah. And now I think in last 7-8 years, you have managed very large teams, I think ranging thousands of people. You have developed some like effective communication tools. How does everybody in the team know what is Peeyush thinking about? What is important for us for next 1 month or next 6 months? Are we doing well? Are we not doing well? Like, how do you keep a, unified communication, and alignment with such a large group?
I can tell you how we did it for a few years pretty well in Google Pay. But it's not a perfect art. I'm still looking for a good way to do it. there are many different levels at which we try to. So let me try to break it in 3 parts. There's a planning way of thinking, saying like, let's understand where we are going. Let's make sure everybody understands where we are going. We have smart people. They all understand. They're very good at their job. If they understand where we have to go, then the emergent behavior will be such that things will be done. So that is one part. How do we do it? I think the easiest was at the top, at like, let's say the GM level, would be a little bit of a strategic conversation at a higher business objectives. That market share, are we trying to make money? Are there technical things which we should really be betting on, trends and whatnot? So there is that. And then we had like a brain trust, which is a little bit larger, let's say everybody director and up, who would get together and we would present so as you think through this, you kind of know a group of people will flesh this out further, because only that much we can sit in a room and talk about it. But then people are presenting and it's open debate. Like you say that this is what we're going to do. This is, for example, Google Play is a global product. Oh, we're seeing success in India. What about a country which is like India, let's say Indonesia? Do you want to do anything there? Okay, so somebody presents. So that is one. But other people who are not working on Indonesia are also knowing, because information is the lifeblood of the organization. Now what you have is everybody who you expect to run independently now at least understands the detail level. But this is all, by the way, forward-looking. The reality does not match this, right? And then, of course, the last bit is then you turn into these goals, which then get factored into goals for the teams, and then you do all hands and you kind of share that. Okay, that is done, and that is done once every time you're doing goal setting. Goal setting is great because without that you cannot execute coherently, but doesn't mean that that actually allows you to execute coherently by itself. The second is the feedback loop, which we work on. There, the mechanism is to broadly update the entire organization on where we are going. And in that, and I used to send an email every week to the entire org, which sometimes people would worry that what if it leaks and all that, but thankfully, it never did. But we would talk about that these things are working well, these things are not working well, these teams launched this. Why? Because the point was people would know. And number of times the feedback would come back from corners of the organization saying, oh, this, you know what, we are doing this, or great, you talked about that. So you were a connector of the people as things were going. And then, of course, you do business reviews and all, which I will not talk about. Every company does that and every organization does that. And lastly, subjectively connecting with the teams by actually walking around. I mean, I used to try, and like when Caesar and I were on that team, we would show up in every office. We would talk to all the people. We would talk to them in small settings. We'll talk to them in large settings. We'll take them out for dinner. We'll talk there. But it was all about like learning more how things are going. How can I help? It used to be the primary question.
This information being the lifeblood, right? I think Google has pioneered a lot of things in that, right? Starting with the whole TGIF concept. From what I understand, a lot of board decks are shared with the entire company. I don't know.
They used to be, for sure, yeah. Other than the financial, because we're a public company, like Eric would stand on the stage and there'll be no financial things. Yeah. But would walk us through the entire board deck, saying this is what we told the company.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. In Google, at its size, probably, I don't know, over 100,000 employees. I think a lot of startups, the entrepreneurs are cagey about what to share with even small team, 20 people, 50, 100 people. I think information is incredibly empowering. And when people have access to all the information, you feel you belong, you have a sense of ownership. You have also much better informed to take right decisions. And otherwise you are trying to guess what might be happening and you are working with the partial information. It's also a great leveler. The more information out there, the less room for politics. Everyone knows that there is no information arbitrage that you can use.
Yeah, and think about yourself as like, the day you're a very sharp guy showing up day one on a job or like first year out of college, and a company which actually trusts you with information. You would naturally want to give it a lot more, and you feel like you're part of the thing. Otherwise, you don't feel you're part of the thing. You feel like you are a cog in the wheel, but you've never been a cog in the wheel anywhere else. And you can do a lot better than being then you're like, what, screw this, I'm going to go do my own company. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, I've been in 3 startups. It's actually good. But the point is, it should not be because you could not bring people along. You have hired best brains, give them what they need so they can run.
No, absolutely. I want to underline that, right? I mean, the one kind of phrase I use in the companies I work for is, other than payroll data, all the information belongs to everybody. It doesn't matter where you are in the corporate hierarchy. And anyone who either process system people who block that, they're kind of doing disservice. And ultimately it'll translate to lesser pace of either growth or innovation or some friction in the system. So I think just as much as possible, embracing the fact that information just belongs to everyone is generally will lead to a better company environment.
I will give you an example which I'll contrast between the 2 companies I have worked at. I'll not name them, but one company, and I was an engineer in both of them, one company had what I would call siloed repos. The code base was such that the product you worked on was the only one who could access the code base. And the other company had open repo. Anybody could see anything. It doesn't mean that you go and change anything which you want, because there were still checks and balances, but you could see anything. The empowerment in the second company was so high. And also I saw the difference was that in one place, people would feel like, I am the owner of this, you cannot touch it. And it was hard to change that thinking. And in the other one, it was more like, if anybody said, I am the owner of it, people said, no, you are not. The company is the owner of this. You are the custodian of this, right? It's like custodian of a building cannot say you cannot go in. There are rules by which the person allows or not allows, but is not the owner of the building. So I think that there was a sentiment which allowed more people to feel like, yeah, I can participate. I can see what's. Yeah. I think that we saw clear productivity difference between the 2.
And Peeyush, over the years, I've actually studied, Google many times. There's a lot of outstanding book on Google in the Plex, I think Work Rules that Laszlo wrote and so on. At some point, I was trying to figure out, how do we build Silicon Valley-like culture in India, Myntra, Cult.Fit, etc. Has taken a lot of inspiration from Google, which is this environment of generally open information access, sense of equality, really no boundaries between work life, very comfortable office environment, a lot of perks and so on. And the reason I bring that up, off late, this, I mean, we've all watched what, Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, right? So very different culture, only 10% employees left, very, we use the word hardcore. However crazy that may be, it gives you a pause and think, because Twitter was probably epitome of that, very comfortable culture. There was a napping pods everywhere and gourmet food and this, that. And I think 2 years ago, I would have taken for granted. Yes, of course, people feel happy, they feel at home. It's a cost is very small and so on. Yeah, any point of your thoughts on, they're probably too extreme. I'm not asking you to pick an extreme, but how to think about this, kind of new paradigm that I think Silicon Valley was not used to.
I don't know if I want to be Elon Musk style of manager, honestly. But at the same time, I think the way I always think about it is we are a sports team. If we are a sports team, you can make the locker room really comfortable. You can have sports drink everywhere and all that. But every athlete has to be super fit, has to show up for training, has to play like a team, has to go win the matches, right? Has to have sportsman conduct. If those things don't happen, it does not matter how cushy their life was or what kind of endorsements they're doing out in the public. They don't belong in the team, right? Now, there is sometimes that, and it's human nature, that you sometimes forget what is the cause and what is the effect. When people work very hard, you do want to give them an environment. That does not mean that environment is what is the primary defining thing. I remember when we came to Flipkart, there was a problem which Flipkart was facing at that time in the engineering team, that there was something that if they wanted an equipment, it used to take a little bit longer. And I remember that I had asked the equipment team, I said, no, if an engineer wants something, within 24 hours, please. So figure out how, because it's their productivity which is based. Because this was equipment, it was clearly Now, the problem is that if you don't think about what is going on, you might think anything I want from any support function within 24 hours I should get, right? And that can lead to bad behavior if you don't understand where it came from. And I would not say that, what Elon, obviously he has shown something, but I think that this is a human nature. I will say that there are people who struggle all their life and they amass a lot of wealth, and then their kids don't understand where the wealth came from and they take it for granted. And then there's a story, right? Like short sleeves to short sleeves in 3 generations. It is because people forget what is the cause and what resulted in the effect. Maybe some of that is going on, and I think eventually it will come down to, are we really winning the games? Do we have a strong team?
A lot of folks in tech or Silicon are at least watching very closely, how Twitter X story unfolds, because it's a very different kind of experiment, not just how a company is run. I don't think, Valley has seen the new culture that he's trying to, who knows, it may work, may not work. But it is dramatically different.
It is dramatically different. I actually don't know details of the culture and I shouldn't comment on it, but I will say that there is no perfect culture. There is that, but not everything there is perfect. There are good things coming out of it. There are bad things coming out of it. Similarly, another company which is a great example of a different culture but does really well is Apple, right? Apple is probably the most valuable company right now in the world. And it has a very different culture than any of these companies you're talking about. But they're building products who everybody in the world who can afford is using. So I think that there are good and bad everywhere, which one can pick from. In this case, maybe the good question is like, where is it that efficiency was lacking? But the bad could be that if somebody who's far removed from it doesn't understand the complexity of the work you're doing, you are at the mercy of their understanding, and you don't know whether they will or they will not. Whereas there are high trust cultures where they believe that, okay, we have given you everything, and therefore, so it depends on what kind of environment you want to build.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There is potentially a lot of diversity of culture. It also depends on what you're trying to do, how much command and control you want, versus how much decentralization, autonomy you want, what is the nature of the problem, how many decisions you want to be taken at the grassroots levels, people closer to work, versus you want to concentrate decision making and so on, compliance and so on. And I guess each entrepreneur and leader in some ways gets to choose. But these things also, once they're designed a certain way, also becomes impossible to change. Culture is a hardest thing. Yeah,
I actually think that it is actually a business decision, like you said, right? What is from first principles, what is your asset? If your asset is the knowledge worker's brain, which you have brought together and pointed at a problem and created an environment that can work on it, then the question is that if that is your asset, then great. Maybe I could posit that the kind of environment which a company might have on day one to become a successful company, and you change it, doesn't mean that the new environment could have been brought up that way, right? It's just, it would not attract the kind of people. So I think it depends on what stage you are in and what you're trying to do. If we just take, I don't want to speak about Twitter because I don't know the insides of it, but if we just said like a company which is a high trust environment, a low trust environment cannot result in a lot of people coming in and saying, you know what, I'm going to look around the corner, I'm going to think about the problems. The person who is at command at the top has to think about everything and treat everybody else like fungible assets and say, like, go do this, don't question. Okay, well, then you build a certain kind of company which competes a certain way. And it might not be what the company you inherited.
It's a grand experiment, I think. A lot of people are watching with interest, including me. We'll see. This whole idea of, you can go from 100 employees to 10 and still try to make something out of it is just, it's bizarre.
By the way, don't get me wrong. I actually think that the efficiency is definitely great. This is why I come back to the sports team analogy. Like having a team of 50 people sitting in the locker room doesn't help if you're not winning matches out there, right? And having super fit 11 athletes going and winning matches is obviously better. So the thing is, are you going there or not? So I think it's definitely.
And speaking of, building this, winning teams and having a I guess your sports team analogy implies that ultimately a very clear score. You're winning or not, and you want to have world-class athlete equivalent. How deeply involved are you in hiring? And there are certain patterns which you keep going back to when you're hiring. I probably answer depends on at what level of seniority, but what are some of your go-to mental models as you think about hiring this a rock star performers for your teams?
So one thing is the goals and the score are probably changing rapidly enough. In my career, I've worked on so many different domains and products, and I actually enjoy it because I feel like technology allows us the luxury to jump around and try different things. So the people who generally, I would say, are great all-rounders is the ones which we have tried to look for. Prefer great all-rounders over domain experts. Doesn't mean that there is no room for domain experts, but the domain itself changes so rapidly all around that people who were using BlackBerry were using iPhone within a year. People who were building certain kind of natural language processing are now facing LLMs in front of them. Things change very fast. So the kind of people I would look at would be the ones who are quick on their feet and move with a sense of purpose and mission. Beyond that, the other thing which I have tried very hard to do is see if the team can be a good mix of people who tend to be more analysis paralysis and people who will just charge with into the fog, right? I think that everybody charging into the fog doesn't create a little bit of upfront thinking, but at the same time, if everybody is thinking, analyzing, you don't make progress. So setting up a group, which is, and that is the hard part because people do not like the other kind, because and helping create that sense of no, the other person, even though every time they say no, give them a little bit of time so they can maybe make you think. And at the same time, yeah, you're saying no, we heard you, but we'll still move. Yeah. Right. So I think that.
And how do you assess some of these things? Interviews are short, right? 30 to 60 minutes. And how do you evaluate some of these things? Some people have very different interview styles, right? Sometimes people give open-ended problems. At some point, Google was known for giving all these, literally puzzles, which I think I would have failed in most of them. That's one way, and many other ways. What is your way of assessing somebody in interview?
I think for the level at which we hire these days, what matters a lot more is how close to the real job I can actually get them to see them doing it. So walking through real problems which we are facing and engaging with them. So I think that, by the way, 30 minutes, 60 minutes are sometimes very short for it. But getting them to engage on it in depth and not really hand wave at a high level, like real complex problems of, you don't know what the right strategy is, but you got to do something. And here are your assets. Or sometimes you don't even talk about it. And then how do they dig through the problem? What do they tell you? Or there is a organization which is not performing really well and therefore is dragging everything down. How do you address that? And that is one. And sometimes how they have done, you ask, okay, well, when did you do that? Give me more. I have realized that after somebody has worked for 20 years, there is enough pattern in the history which you can dig into and see how they operated. Like I told you, right? If somebody who's just gone to US, their green card is being processed, they just had a baby, there's no safety net. Right. We didn't have any family there, and says, screw it, cancel everything, I'm going to go do a startup. Yeah. Well, that already, if I made that decision in my life, and if it comes up in an interview, you can tell the kind of person I'm likely to be, right? So just like those kind, and sometimes we ask very specific product design questions, which are so ambiguous that it requires the person to think through. But those are probably for a level below, like a director level. Probably.
I think one of the things I like what you said, it is taking a current live real world problem. If I think about Cult, for us retention is a perpetual problem. We have certain retention, ideally we want something else, and just spending a whole hour with somebody, if the person is going to work in the broad area, that look and share the facts, look, this is a historical data, we have tried this doesn't work. What do you think we can do? And just that dialogue itself will probably give you a lot more versus, going through just a resume, all that.
Exactly. And the thing which I have felt is like, encourage the person to go into details.
Right.
Because sometimes they are also thinking, oh, it's an interview, so are you just looking for broad strokes? Right. I'm like, no, don't talk like, in engineering panel, don't give pseudocode.
Yeah.
Right? Like, talk about details. What would you do if this problem is there? Like, this is a problem I'm facing. And that gives a little bit sense. I call it like, really, if you had the job, what would you do? Like, trying to simulate that. Yeah.
Do people still use that phrase, airport test in Google?
Airport test?
Okay, no. This is one of the Google books. Okay, I can tell you some of Google history now. I think it's one of the Larry Page or Sergey Brin. I think they had this in the early days of Google. They call it airport test. Basically, if let's say you're interviewing candidate and you imagine a situation that, you have a transitioning your flight and you're stuck at the airport for 3 hours with the person. Will you be looking forward to having a conversation or will you avoid that person?
Yes.
If you can't, then that's not a person for you, no matter how competent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that I have not actually heard about, but that sounds like a very interesting.
So clearly I've studied Google a bit. So I have some.
I probably would go and definitely curate my Facebook friend list and Twitter follower list based on this. Like, do I want to hang out with the person for 3 hours? Yes.
You have worked on some really large scale project. I want to talk to you about this whole Next Billion initiative of Google. And I think the context of that is very important. Some of the work I have done in India, at some point I realized a lot of, things that entrepreneurs in India are doing, most of them end up going to top 10, 20, 30 million households. Very few technology projects which reaches the entire population scale. UPI is that, PhonePe, Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, but handful of products. So what was the whole idea behind Next Billion? Where did you guys start, and what are the initiatives you were able to drive while you were there involved in that?
I actually feel like that has been probably the most fulfilling aspect of my work life. Is being able to work on this. In retrospect, because I was thinking about like, why did I enjoy working on this? And retrospect, how NBU came about or what was happening before that. What had happened was, I am like, was a software engineer, turning into manager, running things, and then decided, want to work on a project like Google Workspace. And my rallying cry used to be, this will be the first non-ads $1 billion Google will make. And which was actually true. Cloud was coming up. McKinsey used to write papers, cloud or not. Soon after it became, who's cloud, right? So like it actually was a great thing. Microsoft also went through like Office. My wife used to work there. That is why I used to joke about like, you work in Microsoft Office, $18 billion. I'm going to go and work in a competing product. So they went through Office 365, Office Live, the full journey everybody did. Part of that was when I asked for like, we got to invest more in this space. My manager is a well-known person in industry, Urs Helsley. He built all of Google's technical infrastructure and all that. He said, we can give you all that, but you have to go and manage Google India engineering, and you can build a team there. So, I grew up here, but I had left as a graduate student and then had family and kids and everything. I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, I'm an Indian. I'll come and live here.
Which year was this?
This was 2010. So I had been in US for 15 years by then. So I was like, how hard can that be, right? And it was very clear that when I showed up and I had a job and I was doing my job and things were fine. But one thing struck me very clearly, that I had forgotten what life is like. And while I still look the same and talk the same, the brain had changed and it had forgotten. And then after living here for 2 years and reabsorbing it, one thing which was very clear, so when I went back, one thing which was very clear was that there is an intersection at which a lot can be done, which is bring deep technology and try to have worldwide impact with that. You could change people's lives. A bunch of examples come to mind, but I can give you examples of before, and here are some examples of things which we worked on. So this is the intersection of like, how can you apply deep technology to change a whole lot of things in the world? And I have really enjoyed like staying true to that intersection, but it started with NBU. I had a driver who used to take me to office and come back. It was a Google driver. Google's a technology company. In those days, we didn't have like Android as broad, right? Android was still up and coming and all that. iPhone was like also very barely visible, other than if you went to the top 0.1% of the country. And I asked him once what's happening, and he said, "Oh, my son broke his leg. So we were trying to figure out this weekend what to do. So we went to the VAD up the street, and he lives somewhere in Bangalore. And he said, do XYZ. I said, take him to a doctor. He's like, no, I went to the VAD and it was fine. I said, okay, you are spending the entire day in the office. There's free Wi-Fi. And he had a phone. And I'm like, just look up on it. It was like one of the earlier Samsung phones with a keyboard and all that, but had a browser. But he didn't. And I was like, I'm living a different world. This person is surrounded by internet and devices and technologists. And his kid, obviously he cares about, and is like, this thing is missing. So that is where it struck me that you can actually change people's quality of life. This is the best case scenario, and you are still not. You can change quality of life. So when we went back, and so when I went back, I got branded as the India guy, because obviously I worked here with Google. And Motorola had been acquired by Google, and they said, we are going to build a phone which is 1/3 the price of smartphones. And which is great. In that time, you had only two smartphones, iPhone and Samsung. So this was going to be a phone which was 1/3 the price. Those were $400, $500. This was going to be $180. And the phone was going to be called Moto G, Moto Google, right? So Moto G. So I went and started working on that on the software side. And that was the whole thesis. But the basic idea was that the phones you have, if you can build a phone which you would like to use with a little bit more, but not the price over there, and you can use it, many more people in the country or the world, not just country, because we were thinking India and Brazil as our first two markets, we'll go use it. The funny thing which we realized is that, okay, and how it actually worked out. So that was the genesis of it from one side, because we worked on it and realized, obviously, you have to reduce the cost. You have to reduce the cost. It has going to be cheaper hardware, smaller screen, smaller memory, and all that. But the basic thing is, you look at what are the top 5 things people, this is where technology comes in, right? You look at what are the top 5 things people do with their product, right? This is going to the earlier conversation we had about as an engineer, then as a manager, then you're thinking about the problem. You're like, what are the top, these are the 5 things. People hit the home button, they make a phone call, they take a picture, and there's a couple more, I forget what, launch an app.
Message.
Yeah. So, actually, messaging was not that big somehow. People were phone calling a lot more and they were taking pictures. But the thing was, so we took that and we had these high-speed cameras and robotic arms, and we would run these tests and optimize the hell out of those 5 things. Now what happens is when you have a Samsung S4 in your hand and you have Moto G, 1/3 the price, but it does those things which you care about, right? The second innovation was by the way, so this is the thing which we did. Which was a fascinating experience. There were multiple things which we did in the middle to reduce the price, but always with the point of view that the quality of life will go up. The second big one was we tried to sell it in India, but in those days, and this is like Flipkart was innovating in that space, but supply chain otherwise was not very good. So we went with one of the companies, a very prominent logistics company, and they said, we'll take 30%. So we're like, 30% is a lot. And I remember I was the engineer in the room, right? Or software engineer guy. And there was a person who was responsible for the P&L and the market. But I had come from India. And he says, like, this is going to raise the cost. I'm like, why don't you sell it online only? And they're like, what do you mean by sell online only? I'm like, yeah, then the cost will not be there. But they're like, but these are the phones for people who don't have online access. How do you do this?
I'm finding it really funny. A Google guy saying 30% is a lot. We can have a whole
30%,
different
no, because
conversation on,
no, because we were gonna distribute it to people who were not buying those phones today, right? So, and I actually said this. I was like, people understand, because people understand the value of 30%. I always say, like, even millionaires in this country will give a missed call to their driver when it is actually virtually 1 paisa to, make the call.
I'm alluding to a lot of startups in India, they cry for the, I need a Play Store, right? The fee they have to pay.
I am actually talking about the cost of distributing the phone was, in this case, turns out the basic thinking was that if you put it online, a person who doesn't have online access will find a person who has online access and they will buy. So actually, I don't know if you recall, that was our first interaction with Flipkart. Is like, okay, can you please sell these online? And I have to say that experiment turned out to be true, because almost everybody I talk to who has heard of Moto G says, oh yeah, I bought one for my chacha, or I bought one for my bua, or they all did that.
And in retrospect, was this whole entire Next Billion User initiative, was it able to move the needle significantly in terms of bringing,
this is the genesis of like the first project in that space. Now, of course, after that, many companies came, and the smartphone access in the country, and the beauty is the smartphone access happened this way. Motorola got spun out, so we were working on low-cost Android in Android. Caesar and I started working together at that time. That is where NBU came up.
Right.
So we looked at, okay, what other problems will we go tackle? But it always was that deep technology and broad usage.
Got it.
Right. So that is the facet where GPay also came out of that.
Right. Yeah. And GPay has done incredibly well. From what I understand right now, between PhonePe and GPay, I think over 80 or 90% share of all UPI transactions, something like that. And I think GPay also came from behind. I think at some point, Paytm was there, obviously, and then PhonePe was running away with it when UPI launched. But very quickly, I think GPay got really active, and I think really caught up in meaningful. And also, interesting anecdote. I mean, both you, me, and Samir, we worked very closely together in 2015, and I was out of system, but you and Samir were
I will actually posit, and that it's GPay which actually broke the UPI curve this way. It was called Taze. I'll tell you why. Because one of the first problems, so like UPI was there, and I am amazed, and anybody who has observed it closely is amazed at what the India stack has done, right? I mean, like, I sometimes feel like a lot of governments I know in the world are looking at what India stack has done. So UPI was there. Paytm was not supporting it or supporting it. I don't remember what it was. And we were going to launch. You can go look at the chart as public. September 2017 is when we launched. And you'll see the curve like this. But here is why. I think one of the big thesis which we had to go crack is people were not comfortable using their phone as a replacement for cash. Because you walk into a store and the storekeeper gets a bunch of cash and hands you the goods, right? You are walking around and this cash you have in your pocket is giving you a sense of security. You're like, I have my money, right? Somebody owes you something and it's in the phone. How do I spend? Where do I go? And what if my phone runs out of battery? There are thousands of problems. So we spent a lot of early days in what we called you might have used the scratch card, right? So we built the scratch card. Why did we build it? It was like teaching people how do you use your phone to pay, right? And I remember, in those days, there were people who would say, oh, these scratch card, we all get paid because we keep paying each other and we are playing Taze, right? So we are playing Taze, you're losing money. And I would look at it, I would be like, but you realize that everybody is learning how to use their phone to pay for things. And that is a behavioral shift. And I think that I feel very proud that we invested in. And then everybody, obviously it's a useful thing, so everybody's doing that. But I felt pretty good. I will still say our traffic actually broke the UPI curve. Obviously, PhonePe is a great product. So.
We'll go back and look at the numbers for all those years. But I think just zooming out, I think it's just a matter of 4 or 5 years. I think, between GPay and PhonePe and Paytm also, to their part, I mean, the whole landscape of payment is just completely transitioned, and it's a truly democratic. It's not something technology which, iPhone, only very super rich people have. But this is everybody using, and when you see those roadside vendor and their thela, right, and that also has a UPI code, like this is a different level of scale. So maybe some of the, as you're building it, at some point Google also would have had to build this, offline footprint also, because GPay is not useful unless you can scan QR code pretty much every nook and corner. So how did the whole machinery came to be?
Yeah, I think that definitely was there. The point which you said that it actually reaches this scale, I think the amount of impact which this scale creates in terms of, I'll connect it back to the quality of life. I'll talk about that and then I'll tell you how we got to this. There is actually an interesting thing that there is a phase where you don't have to do it. And yet you are able to change things because, like many solo entrepreneurs still use gmail.com. They don't create their own domain, right? Similarly, you have your own bank account and you're running your small stall and you're just transitioning, like, you're driving a taxi, you're collecting money just like that before you have a full merchant outreach kind of program. But the difference in people's lives starts to show up very early. I was talking about Moto G. I will give you one example because, by the way, a lot of these threads, they connect. And when you see this happens in NBU markets, then you kind of like know it'll happen many times. I'll give you one example of a Moto G story, and we can talk about UPI. And then at what point we said, all right, let's go with the merchants as well. But when we built the low-cost Android phones, and it was beating the Samsung in benchmarks, obviously it became very successful in India and in Brazil. But those were the two markets we were selling in. But we were looking at dashboard, and we realized that around 10 or 11% of the phones, when they were being activated in UK or Europe. But we were not selling it there. So why was it activating over there? And the reason it was activating was, we think NBU and these things, but there are a lot of people all over the world who have problems, which when you make technology so accessible, it goes and solves that problem. And sometimes we forget that one of the biggest things as part of the tech industry we have done is made things accessible to everybody. That is where the scale comes from. And this is why I was talking about the India stack. It has built something which billions of people can access, right? As a government, I mean, this is like a fantastic thing. UPI is possible for the street side vendors because they're getting banked and their bank is providing UPI connectivity and the government is managing the switch, and there's very limited concentration of power. Everybody can go and offer a service. So I think it's actually very well done. So in going back to like when it starts reaching in scale, the person who, like, I'll give you two examples. There's an example of like somebody who comes to, say, clean your house, your maid. They started using it, But the thing is, like, we might feel like, oh, is it a matter of convenience? The person is using it, and they're using without any outreach. They're like, oh, can you pay me using Google Pay or Phone Pay? The reason they would start using it is because what might be a monthly payment which one is making to them, they probably work in 5-10 houses, and they're collecting in one day their entire paycheck. I mean, imagine anybody here, if the entire world knew that today is the day, you will have your pockets full of cash of what you earned the entire month coming out of your business or your employer, and you have to walk home with that. And who knows what your home situation is and who will demand that cash be handed over and whatnot. And the quality of life change when all you did was give somebody your phone number and they were able to do, and the money showed up in the bank. And you're walking around and you don't have to worry about like how I'll run my entire month is now shoved into my pocket on this particular day, right? So that is a thing which we don't face, but the person faces, so they who adopt the technology. I'll give you a very personal example, which I tweeted about. And you are familiar with this, right? When I joined Flipkart, my father passed away, like within a few months. That was one of the challenges. So one day my mom, she came to me And I was about to leave for work. She comes to me with the ATM card. And my mom is a very well-educated, she's a doctor. She has been a professor, she's educated. She comes to me with her ATM card and says that I need to take some money out of the ATM. So I think, and I'm rushing to work. So I think she's like, oh, she needs the driver to take her to the ATM. So I'm like, okay, why don't you wait half an hour? I have to get to work and he'll come back, he'll take you. She's like, no, your dad used to go to the ATM and take the money, so I have not used this. So I actually need you to come with me and show me how to enter the PIN. And I was like, what? And the thing is that, she obviously could have done it, but she had never done it. So at that point, in that minute, whatever cash I had, I gave her. I said, like, you take it, do your thing for the day. I'll come back from office and I'll take you. Anyway, the reason I give this context is now she would live in Delhi. I was living in Bay Area. Years passed. We were working on Google Pay. Once I showed up in Delhi for Google Pay for India, like I configured her phone. The first thing she did was send me 101 rupees and said Ashirwad, right? So that's like very cute. But things are fine. That's okay. But every time she would message me saying XYZ has to be done, the broadband bill is not working. And like, okay. So I used to handle things. So one day, she sends me a message saying the LIC premium is due. LIC premium is not a small amount of money you have to give, and LIC premium is due. So can you pay it? And I reply, I said that I'm at work, but go to sleep. I'll get it done before you wake up, because that evening, I'll get it done by evening before you wake up. And I'm at work in the middle of a meeting. She sends me a message saying, don't worry about it. I paid it using Google Pay. And that was such a heartwarming thing that a person who at one time didn't have the confidence with the accessibility of the product was able to go and do it. And this story is repeated billions of times around the world, right? So when you see those things, then we go and we find more of those problems and we want to go work on it. Now, coming to your question, when you are seeing this happening, the fact that you want to reach all the merchants becomes a little bit of a secondary thing. Yeah. Your dashboard is full of like more and more people using it just by the nature. But at some point, you do realize that going from these sole entrepreneurs or whatever, there is a set of services which others care about, right? Whether it is better accounting, multiple salespeople being able to receive into the same account, or credit services or other kind of financial, like there are many things, supply chain payments. So there are a lot of things which you cannot do unless you actually have that outreach. Yeah. So at that point, when the product maturity gets to a point where we say, all right, this is another thing which we can tackle right now, is when we go do it.
Right. Yeah. So, payments is probably, mobile phone has many killer use cases. I think in Indian context, payment is definitely one of many use cases which have reached population scale and, kind of impact stories, you're sharing them, they're everywhere, you see on an everyday basis. And UPI is continuing to evolve. There is more on the way. I think, it's probably going to dramatically transform how credit happens, because credit access is still not very democratic in India and so on. But I want to zoom out now, I think, you and I have a similar timeline journey around technology. We have seen the initial internet wave happen, then mobile phones, social media, and now there's an incredible buzz around AI, right? Which is very surprising also. Given that I think, being a computer science guy, both you and I know that AI has been in works for decades. Even in your time, in my time in college, we would do neural net projects back then also. But I think, I don't know, it seems at least for me that a lot of people were just caught unaware that how fast, even with things like AlphaGo was happening and, all the work that, DeepMind has done, and so on. So, but people are not paying attention. And suddenly with, success ChatGPT, suddenly, everyone's paying attention. And now so many people are rushing into basically building AI of everything. How do you feel, let's say you're talking to the prospective entrepreneurs who are thinking, AI as a next wave, they want to catch this wave, leverage it. How should they process, where the technology is? And we have seen this story, also not go that well few years ago when, crypto was all the rage, or metaverse was all the rage and so on. So what is how should one think about this and be on the right side of it and not perhaps get too carried away?
Yeah, I would do it as from first principles. I was never a big fan of crypto even then, but it is because of first principles, and I can talk about it. I have made, I think I've said I'm a crypto skeptic, and a lot of people hated me at that time.
But Bitcoin is still holding up. I don't understand.
Yeah, I understand, but it is holding up.
You may understand. I don't understand.
No, but I mean, it is a supply-demand thing, right? So long time ago, there are many things I don't understand, and I'll be probably wrong in many of them. I carried around a BlackBerry for 6 months after iPhone came out, right? So, I didn't understand SPACs when people were becoming all SPAC crazy. I didn't understand. I understand blockchain. I understand, trustless or federated computing over some sort of federated trust. I think that the thing here is in AI from first principles. So you are right that it has been around for a long time. People have been doing rule-based stuff. Fuzzy logic was one big one.
Expert systems.
Yeah, exactly. Expert systems were built. Neural networks were there, but it never really was reaching the level of maturity because you couldn't compute that deep, or you didn't have as much data to go train on. And there are many different systems. Obviously, the classifiers and prediction systems have been there, and we have used different levels of those in various products. But first principle wise, what is happening now is, I think, the ability to model what the person is saying, or the natural language, has suddenly gotten to a level that is actually almost human. You don't have to say things in a weird way for it to understand. It's very resilient in understanding what you're saying. And it's very good at also creating content which you will understand. Now, of course, that is where it can create content which is not true. It'll come up with 10 books on any topic with very, credible titles, and those books will not exist.
Really?
Yes. You can say, what are the 10 books on, let's say, crypto?
I mean, right? I understand hallucination around concepts is one thing, but books are factual matter. There is an ISBN or there is not an ISBN.
No, there is. What I'm saying is, there is that, but these large language models by themselves are not designed to be factual. They are what the term a lot of people use is stochastic parrots. They are essentially, I mean, if you look at the paper which had come out, the attention is all that matters. In a lot of the processing, there used to be a sequence information and then attention window in which you would look at things. And they said, no, attention window is primarily what matters. But then it learned all these words belong together, right? They have relations with each other. That's the primary thing. So it can generate names of books, which will be what somebody would generate, but doesn't mean there's a book by that name. And you can try this experiment. I remember in the early days, I would try an experiment saying, create a party playlist for DJ Badshah and give me a YouTube link to it. It would actually generate a bunch of songs and then give me a YouTube link. That link does not exist. Okay, because it generated a link, which is as good as any other link.
Yeah.
So there were things like these which it can do, but that aside, and all of these are problems which will get solved, right? So if I look at it from first principles, what is happening is ability to understand language has become so good that any other way to interface with systems now can become a language-based interface to systems, right? And this is what we are starting to see is people say, oh, I'm generating code using this. Well, you are able to express something in English or whatever language, and it is generating a bunch of other language, which is a programming language. And then you are when you see a problem here, you're saying, and it's actually troubleshooting. So it's essentially become your pair programmer of sorts, right? But the biggest thing there is it understands your language. So that is the first thing principle-wise I would look at. The second thing principle-wise, actually, and there is a corollary to that. There is a thesis that the knowledge itself gets captured. There is paper which actually shows that when you create these vectors essentially for any particular token, their relationship with each other is such that there's knowledge captured in that, right? So when you actually look at these things, you can say, okay, there is cognition, language, and knowledge. They're all kind of coming together. So, okay, this is great. Now what? If you're building a product which is essentially saying that I will go and do this feature now better because, because now somebody has provided a model on top of which I can do it. Like, let's say I can translate from language A to language B a lot better, or I can create meeting notes out of a meeting transcript a lot better. Now that is actually probably not a startup that's going to survive a lot, because it's very easy. These foundational models exist, but programming on that has become very easy. People can just make it very easy. So the question is, what is the unique thing which you are building? I always maintain, I had heard somewhere that a startup has to innovate faster than a large company can distribute. Now, if you are not building something unique where you're adding value and you're using these models, or using an open source model also, and the thing is, like, well, what value did you add? If you didn't add and you just integrated those, these have become so easy. Somebody else will, and somebody who can distribute much further will actually do it much better than you. So that is the second thing I would not. So then the question is that how would I build a company based on these things? The example I always look at is like, where are the problems not yet solved? In terms of services which are needed, is the tool chain right? Are the tools such that it's super easy for anybody to go do it? That can be like picks and shovels kind of business. The other thing I kind of look at is, are there layers which are missing? I talk about the security angle. Any technology, when it takes up like this, it will have bad actors coming in and trying to do things. And the question is, what kind of security infrastructure do you need? Finding your niche in there, building it out. That would be another example. Or you can go to the very top and you can say, what kind of applications nobody's building? And if I built, it would not be that easy for somebody else to copy. EdTech is a good example. Like, what do textbooks of tomorrow look like, right? Is teaching the way it is done, even with MOOCs and whatnot, really helping each student learn better? And if not, then what would, it has knowledge, it has language. Can it help be better? Can it be a textbook which I can learn the best from, right? Now, if you do that, now all of a sudden, there is a lot of moat which you can create around it, not just in getting people to adopt it, but also the concepts of like the pedagogy around it. Like, how will you teach a particular topic? What is the progression? There's a lot we can do. Any vertical you go into, I can give one after another, but I would pick vertical, I would go build something deep into it, or I would build layers.
But generally, I mean, and I my sense is AI, the idea of AI is so broad. Probably every vertical, whether you look medical, health, or education, even commerce, probably at some level, there are opportunities in all of those areas, depending upon which are some of the harder problems, which were not solved because either the information was too vast to process and make real-time decision, and now because you have this language models, you can map that domain which may be billions of parameters, and in a real time arrive at a more efficient answer, which a human expert may or may not be able to come back with that.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point. There are two different ways to approach this. One way to approach it is to pick a domain and then go build something vertically and deep, which is where I'm saying that then the domain be such that you are actually building something with unique advantages in it. Like, say, for example, if you're building something which processes a lot of genomic data, okay, then what is your unique advantage compared to somebody else? Is it that you have the database from where you are able to train a system to go do certain kind of tasks really well? Then yes, you have a specific domain model. Or is it that you have contracts with a lot of labs so that you're able to distribute? Is it that you have people who have worked in this problem so long that they understand where the problems are? Otherwise, anybody can put something up on GCP or Azure or something and build something, and you are now out of the game, right? So that is the thing which I would worry about that.
And people who want to build something AI, how deep you think they need to understand? Because today everyone thinks they can based on all these open source tools, you just put your own wrapper, but as you're saying, that also can get disrupted. It's not AI. Once you go couple of level below, it's not that straightforward. You need to understand a lot of maths, you need to understand a lot of algorithms. It's a very sophisticated technology. Do people need to really understand that deeply?
Well, it depends on the problem which you are trying to tackle. But a lot of the people are not really trying to understand that themselves that well, right? Like, just today I was reading an article about a company which is, doing layoffs in AI space because they're running out of money. And the reason I feel, every company has its own thing. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes. But when I look at it from outside, sitting in an armchair, I feel like, oh, but that's because what they're building is not unique enough. But the question is, in that domain, it's not even clear if they had gone further, they could have done something. So your problem also has to require you to go deeper into it. These models which are there, they're so powerful on the general level. And they're going to get even more powerful with these multimodal models, right? Which don't just process text, but they're able to embed information about pixels and, like pictures and voice and video. And now all of a sudden you have something which understands a lot of generic things really well. So when you are doing something specific, you're fine tuning it, you have to know what purpose you are doing it for. And then I think there will be definitely, the funny thing is that what I feel ends up happening in those cases is that the people who understand that space are more valuable than people who understand the fundamentals of setting up or fundamental theory of AI.
Right. Got it.
So that they become more valuable at that level.
I'm going to ask you one crystal ball question. And nobody is outstanding crystal ball, but I'm going to ask anyway. See, if I compare, let's say last 10 years, 2013 to now, the world is quite different. Everybody has smartphone. They use WhatsApp for communication, GPay for payment. Through OTT, pretty much, all the content of the world is at their fingertips. Data cost is, really low. So that's what has changed in 10 years. Very difficult in 2013, if you're having this conversation. I think most people would not have portrayed the world today. Similarly, studying in 2023 to 2033 with the AI, you think the transformation in the world will be equivalent, even more? Just not knowing what will happen, but is going to be ridiculously different?
I absolutely think it'll be ridiculous. We were just talking about the a lifespan escape velocity, right? So I think things will be very different. There's one technology which you said fizzled out, which I actually am very bullish on. Yeah. I think its time is not here yet, but it will if we someday do, which is digitization of reality. Like if you think about it, fintech and all was digitization of money, digitization of information, internet, digitization of cognition is essentially the AI thing. Digitization of reality is metaverse. I don't know if it is a virtual reality, like everything closed, but even Facebook is coming out with the AR setup. Imagine connecting that with AI and, the ability for you to have information, especially with generative AI, right? So the content reality you are seeing doesn't have to be a copy of an existing thing as much as can be created for you. It's almost scary. So
I think Hollywood must be, imagining a lot must be happening there, because I think with the generative AI, the possibilities are insane. How you approach content creation, it can, probably.
Yeah, the society is struggling with that right now. When there are people who are arguing at big scale and small.
Yeah.
Or things like intellectual property rights and many different things. I think it's exciting times. New technology comes in and we are all kind of going through it. I'm sure that all the dust will settle and great things.
Does any of it worry you?
I am just very excited about the future. So, any technology definitely requires us to be very cautious about it, right? So anything which is built when information can flow super fast across the world, good information and bad, both flow. So, but I feel like we are, creators. So we'll figure out how to, bias and not bias, but make sure that it's working for benefit of people.
And Peeyush, I mean, last 15 years, while most of your career has been based out of Bay Area, but I think you've been involved in number of projects in India. Earlier, Next Billion, user initiatives, then with Flipkart, and then GPay. Going forward, are you looking at in what ways you want to stay engaged with next ambitious projects here?
I think I haven't actually thought about, because we stopped working on the NBU framing right now, and I'm right now working on AI related consumer products. So the thinking is more like global in nature, like, okay, how do we build a product which we can get everybody to use, but not really looking at like what are the problems which are unaddressed right now in a particular space. But I think to me, like I'm here, like we have a team here, and it's definitely.
So you will figure out which projects. Google has obviously a very large footprint in India, and I'm assuming India is also probably very important over a scheme of things for Google. But when maybe you're more, how are you looking at India? Outside of your work, we are, the stock of India is rising so much. Everybody is talking about India. This whole $3 trillion to $20 trillion journey looks like it's a fait accompli. It's going to happen. In that context, being an Indian,
I actually think the amount of energy and excitement around entrepreneurial, around startups is through the roof. The social acceptance to what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing a startup, right? Is amazing. I think let the 1,000 flower bloom and a lot of good things will come out of it. So I think that is definitely very exciting to me. I think, if you go back to like Flipkart or InMobi, they succeeded despite the environment. But like a lot of things have changed, right? As we talked about, low cost mobile, India stack, the data. While I was working on NBU, the situation in India went from most expensive data in the world to cheapest data in the world, thanks to Jio, right? So I think that these fundamental things now, these startups are actually supported by the ecosystem, right? So I think that there is a huge lot of things, not just for the country, but also an example for the rest of the world. For like, hey, if you build a stack like this, these are the kind of things that happen, and hopefully these companies will be able to take that and scale it outside as well.
No, it was super exciting to watch. Both how the India journey unfold, but also I think technology is absolutely going to play a big role. You already mentioned the role India stack is playing, and India stack is also evolving. But I think just want to thank you, Peeyush, for taking the time. I think you've got an outstanding career in technology. You've been part of some like really global scale level projects. I know you're working on a lot of exciting stuff, which today you are not able to talk about, but let's see, how AI roadmap unfold, and maybe in sometime future conversation, we can go a lot more deeper into AI.
Well, thank you for having me. It always is fun to, talk to you about all the various things which are of our common interest. I really enjoyed it. And yes, I think I would love to talk more about AI as we are able to bring more of our plans forward.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll probably see you at next longevity conference.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.